All right, perfect. Looks like we're recording. So, my name is Justin McAfee. You can find me on the internet at IAin'tShootin on Twitter and GitHub. And this is CompTIA Security Plus Chapter 2. We're going to be covering threat actors this evening. If you're live with us, we appreciate you being here. If you're not live and you're watching later, appreciate you jumping in and following along with us. Hopefully, we'll have 16 more of these videos for you. This is going to be an introduction to the Security Plus exam, to the Security Plus course material, and should prepare you to set for the exam at the end and get your first job in security or start looking for that first role in security. So why should you keep watching, and who am I? I'm a former PSYOP soldier. Had a bunch of different jobs before that, but most notably was a paratrooper and psychological operations specialist with the U.S. Army. I'm currently an incident response analyst for a global food and beverage supplier. We're one of the top 10 largest privately held companies in the country, and we do business globally on all time scales. And I'm also a dad, a father, husband, and a national park enthusiast. So just recently did our 5th anniversary in Yellowstone. I'm looking forward to go to Joshua Tree in the fall and spend some time out there and work out there. So let's get into it. Looking at Chapter 2, we're going to look at 6 key things tonight. One is going to be how to classify threats. So when we talk about threats, how dangerous are the threats we're looking at, and by what metrics or by what criteria are we going to decide which threats are dangerous, right? We're going to look at hackers' hats, and that'll make more sense when we get to it. If you've never heard of hacker hats, it'll make a little more sense. We're going to look at threat actors, what those are and what kinds there are. We're going to talk about the deep web versus the dark web versus the surface web. We're going to talk about threat vectors, and we're going to talk about threat intelligence. So let's get into it. Classifying threats. There's going to be 4 classifications of threats that you need to know about if you're interested in doing cybersecurity. Those threats are going to be used as, these classifications are going to be used to help us talk about threat actors later and discuss how well they're funded, how dangerous they might be, what their intent might be, and where they're located inside or outside of our network. So breaking these down really quickly, internal versus external means internal to your company or organization versus external. If it's an employee that works for you that's upset about something and they're trying to break things, they're an internal threat. Fairly simple. If they don't work for you or they're not authorized to be on your network, they're not on your staff, then they're an external threat. A majority of the threats that we talk about tonight are going to be external threats. Usually they're things off of your network or outside your enterprise that are trying to get into your enterprise or into your company's network, right? It doesn't mean that we don't focus on internal threats as well. Lots of times that's its own specialty. So they'll be a part of the privacy office, or they'll be a member of the security team that specifically assists with more sensitive investigations. Those investigations usually involve members of HR or possibly members of law enforcement or requests by law enforcement or HR to come up with certain information. So any questions about that classification, internal versus external? No questions? We'll keep going. If you're trying to speak and you can't speak, you can always type in chat. If you're not able to catch up there, I can see the chat while I'm going, so you're welcome to pop in there. Second is going to be our level of sophistication. Are we talking about a script kiddie, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute? Just a script kiddie, some guy who just downloaded some software and is just hitting anything he can hit? Or are the North Koreans trying to get in? Are the Russians trying to get in? Right? Are the Palestinians trying to get in? Who knows? All those are options, right? When you're working for a business or a corporation or an enterprise or a company, at any given time, it's always possible that any spectrum of people are trying to get in. There's a low-level hum of malicious content on the internet that's always attacking everything. And so when we do initial security on something, we're going to be blocking 90% of that just initial nonsense that's out there on the internet. And lots of times that's just automated attacks and things that we'll look at more in depth. There's script kiddies or people just poking around and poking buttons. But sometimes there's people who, for some reason or another, are very interested in the business that you're doing. It might be if you work for a government organization. It might be if you work for a financial organization. It might be if you work for a global food and beverage supplier like myself, that enemies of the country that you work for or that you're a member of or the company that you work with may not want you to be able to provide services or access certain resources. All things that we talked about in our first chapter when we talked about the CIA triad. Anything to break that confidentiality, that integrity, or that availability. Any questions on level of sophistication? Hearing none and seeing none in chat, we'll go on to resources and funding. Sometimes, even if they're sophisticated, they may not have good funding and they may not have good resources. So while the person behind the keyboard may be very intelligent and may be skilled at what they're doing, they may be just one person and they may only have limited resources available to them. Or in the cases of state-funded attackers like Russia, North Korea, Palestine, whatever, they may have entire armies of people that they can use, right? They may be state-funded. They may have an entire treasury to draw from to be able to get resources, get computers, get malicious code, get education, get systems to demo on or anything like that. And again, funding, right? I can only stay up for so many hours and I can only attack things for so many hours. I can only explore for so many hours. So I can't stay up an infinite amount of time. But if I have funding, I can hire additional bodies and then those people can continue to stay up and continue to attack even when I sleep or even while I'm off working on other tasks. Are there questions on resources and funding? Cool. Let's keep going. Intent and motivation. This is one that we'll talk about a lot. Lots of times intent matters. I'm much more worried about a highly motivated political attacker, somebody who's state-funded with a high degree of sophistication outside of my network than I am the 18-year-old down the street who's irritated with my company and they're protesting it and they are lobbing a few softballs at the firewall every now and then. I'm also more concerned about the person inside my network with a low level of sophistication but who's very upset with a lot of intent or motivation to cause harm because they believe that the company or the organization has slighted them than I am other people. So intent and motivation are exactly what they sound like. It's usually the hardest thing to pin down unless they outright tell you. If it's a political protest or they're hacking something or attacking something for a political reason, they may just tell you outright. They may say, we broke into this because X, or we broke this thing because Y. You're doing Z and we don't like it, because they want you to change your behavior. But otherwise, their intent may never be known to you, and that's just something you have to be comfortable with, of not understanding or not knowing sometimes. Any questions about intent? Cool. I'm going to stop for a second before we move on away from classifying threats. These are the four classifications that you're going to use to classify threats throughout the rest of the course. So what questions do we have around threats or classifications of threats? And from the peanut gallery, do we have any comments about anything that I didn't cover that would contribute to their education? All right, hearing none. You guys can still hear me, right? Can I get a sign of life?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
We're good, Justin. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Let's talk about hats, hackers and the hats they wear. I put a little thing up there: one hat, two hat, white hat, gray hat. You've probably heard these terms before, right? You may have seen a news article that said white hat hacker does this thing, and it's generally perceived to be a good thing, but they still call the guy a hacker, right? Or black hat hackers do whatever. If you saw Mr. Robot, those are black hat hackers that are working around, right, and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then there's gray hats, which most people have never heard of, but we'll talk about in depth. This is taken from the old cowboy movies. Usually in cowboy movies, you could tell who was the good guys and who was the bad guys based on the color of their hat, right? So if they had a white hat, they were the good guys. You can basically still apply this principle today. If you're employed, legally allowed to access the systems you're trying to access, and you're authorized to access those systems, you're generally considered to be a good hacker, and you're considered to be a white hat. And if you're interested in doing this as a job, then you may end up in one of two career paths. One's called blue team, one's called red team. Either way, both teams are white hats who are employed by the company, who are authorized to modify security controls, review security controls, and try and defeat by attacking security controls. We'll talk about that more in a later chapter. But those people are white hats. generally considered to be good guys. They're allowed to do what they're doing. They're usually looking for problems so that we can fix the problems before the bad guys find them. The bad guys that we talk about, 90% of the time, are going to be the black hats. They're going to be illegal. They're going to be unauthorized. They may be employed not by your organization, but by an organization that doesn't like your organization, wants to defeat you with one of those options in the CIA triad, and they're generally going to be considered bad. Any questions about good guys and bad guys? It's pretty straightforward. It's usually the gray ones where we start to get questions.
Just to expand on that, white hats, you'll typically hear ethical hackers. You might hear non-ethical hackers. So it's kind of the difference between white and gray, or white and black as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Nick. They in for the CompTIA test, they do use white, black, and gray. However, you will hear different verbiage. So we talked about this in chapter 1. There's going to be times when CompTIA teaches something one way, they test it that same way, but the industry will discuss it in a different way. There's been disparities around the use of black and white for moral good and moral bad as it relates to race and things like that. So there's been an effort from lots of people to take that verbiage out of the community and to not use those phrases anymore. Even though it's based in the old cowboy movies, the implication's still there, so they change up that language and choose not to use it. But if you say white or black hat, people will know what you're talking about, and it will be on the test in this manner. But ethical and unethical hackers are a great term to know as well, Nick. So thanks for sharing that. Gray hat is where you'll end up with some problems. Gray hat is usually illegal most of the time. It's unauthorized, and it's often a customer or outsider. And it's morally questionable in some instances, depending on how they handle their research. But a lot of people will label themselves as a security researcher, and they'll say, well, I wasn't allowed to do this, but I broke into this thing, and here were the results of me breaking into it. And they'll tell the public at large what the results were of their attack, or what the results were of their research, with the intention being that life gets better for everybody because they've disclosed this problem that they found. However, sometimes if they don't disclose things properly, it's often that the bad guys get a leg up, and the bad guys get to take that to ground and start using it to attack people way before the good guys have enough time to patch it or update or upgrade or change processes to prevent that from being exploited, to prevent whatever it is that the gray hat finds from being a problem. So companies have a program that we'll talk about later called responsible disclosure, which is usually a way for smart companies to allow gray hats to contact them and provide them with information, usually for a monetary reward called a bug bounty, but they'll provide them with information, and then the company will say, we're going to fix this problem, we'll fix it within X number of days, and after X number of days, we'll acknowledge that you turned in this problem to us, we'll acknowledge you publicly, and you're free to publish the problem and tell people what was happening. So gray hats aren't necessarily bad, but they can end up in morally questionable situations. I have seen instances where the company came out and the company said, yes, that's bad, and the gray hat said, good, acknowledge it and patch it, and the company said, we're not going to tell anybody, and the gray hat said, hey, if you don't tell people, I will, and I'll publish it anonymously, or I'll publish it under a pseudonym, or I'll publish it through a journal or another third party to provide me with some anonymity, but to force your hand and force you to do something about it. Lots of times if a company is belligerent and doesn't have good cyber policies, they won't have a way set up for gray hats to report things to them. Gray hats will report them, the company will demonize them and try and treat them like a black hat, even though the gray hat has brought the problem to the person whose problem it is. They'll pursue legal avenues to try and hush them up, or try and press charges against them, all kinds of different things. And in those instances, I've most often seen gray hats retaliate by just publishing their research and then making it the company's problem from a PR perspective. Like we talked about in chapter 1, with the different types of risk, it becomes a reputational risk, it becomes a financial risk, it may become an operational risk and a strategic risk, but most likely an operational risk if you can't do business because bad guys are exploiting this problem or whatever. Before we move on, any questions about white hats, black hats, or gray hats? Nothing? No questions in chat? Oh, I hear somebody talking. Do we have something?
Oh, just listening.
Okay, perfect.
I found the unmute button.
Oh, perfect. Thanks for the sign of life. Helps me know that there's people out there. So the next thing we're going to talk about is threat actors. So we've talked about these different threats and how to classify them. Once you've figured out these different classifications here, you can kind of start to figure out who the threat actors are. And threat actors are exactly what they sound like. They're the person acting out the threat. So if you have a network or a business or an enterprise or anything and you're trying to protect it, these are the guys who you're trying to protect it against. Has anybody ever heard of a script kiddie? I know I've used the term a couple of times tonight, but has anybody ever heard of it outside of this class?
Yeah, back in the day playing Counter-Strike Source.
Oh yeah, what were script kiddies known for usually, Nick?
Aimbotting and wall hacking, man. There was people that would go out to these websites and they would just download these scripts before Valve really started being good with their bans, and they would just use live injection of this code, and it would auto aim, their weapons, and you would have, if you were spectating them, they'd have a headshot on you from like 250 meters away through like 7 different walls. And it was so obvious, but that was such a huge thing, and I'm dating myself here because it was like 2003, and I feel awful saying it, but yeah, that's like the first time I ran into that term, well before I was even thinking about working. I remember screaming it at the top of my lungs, just like, you're a script kiddie, you don't have any skill.
That's actually a perfect example, Nick. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, Nick really hit the nail on the head. They go out to websites. He said it at the beginning. They go out to websites and they download software or scripts, maybe without knowledge of exactly what's happening under the hood, but with knowledge that they claim to do X. So in his case, they could go out and download these mods or scripts, and then it would help them cheat at the game, right? It would make them better. And that's exactly what script kiddies do. Script kiddies have been around since the beginning of the internet. And even before that, in hacking labs at Bell Laboratories and AT&T and other places, somebody writes up a cool program. They understand how it works. They understand the intent of it. They understand the danger that the program might cause. And then somebody else gets a hold of it and says, hey, I could use this as a weapon, or I could use this, whether it was intended to be malicious or not, I could use this to do something bad. And then they go and use that code. They didn't write the code. They don't understand the code. They're not very advanced. A really good example of this, if you guys want to play with one, and I'll give you permission to attack one of my websites later on in the class, which will make you a white hat hacker, consequently, because I'm giving you authorization, right? But you'll get to pretend for a minute. There's a piece of software called the LOIC, the Low Orbital Ion Cannon, and it was a huge deal when I was coming up in cyber and in computers 15 years ago. The LOIC was used all the time. If somebody was messing with you on Counter-Strike, you'd get their IP address and you'd hit them with an LOIC and it'd knock them offline. How did it work? I had absolutely no idea, but I knew that if I put in the IP address, that it would attack that person's computer and they would go away, and that was good enough for me. Script kiddies usually have very little to no funding. They have very little sophistication. They have usually no intent other than maybe personal vendetta, or maybe a little bit of curiosity, and they're usually external to whatever you're working with, right? They'll most often just download things. Somebody says, "Oh, look, this is a cool virus." If you put in somebody's IP address, it'll attack them, or if you send it to them in Facebook Messenger or send it to them through text or whatever, it'll mess with their device. But they don't really understand what's going on under the hood. Script kiddies are part of that low-level hum of danger on the internet, that low-level hum of threats that exist out there that I said, if we're creating something, we're going to build it to block about 90% of it. Script kiddies are part of that 90%. They're just the lowest hanging fruit. If you put your computer out there on the internet, somebody will find it. They may be on your street, they may be in your city, they may be in your state, they may be global, it doesn't matter. They're just hitting stuff to be hitting stuff. Before we go forward, any questions about script kiddies? Or what questions do we have about script kiddies? None? Okay. I'll keep going. I'll tell you, I was a script kiddie when I started out. I got my LOIC from somebody. They showed me how to put in the IP addresses. put in the IP address, it would knock somebody offline. So a lot of people that you run into in the field will have a background where they either started out in video game modding or in ScriptKitty, just messing with what are often called wares, W-A-R-E-Z, as a really common theme for people to start into the field and get interested in security or how computers work. The next is going to be hacktivist. Hacktivist started as a term really around 2007 is where I heard the term start coming into the zeitgeist and people start using it all the time. One of the most popular activist or hacktivist groups is Anonymous. Anonymous has come toe-to-toe with government organizations. They've come toe-to-toe with Wall Street, with the Church of Scientology, with YouTube, with and Google and a number of other groups. Anonymous is a very, very popular hacktivist collective. Hacktivists, using those 4 categories, does anybody want to take a guess at how we would start to categorize these hacktivists? I'll give you a hint, and that's that these threat actors are in order from not as bad to worse. Somebody give us a guess. What's internal versus external? Where do you think these hacktivists are going to be?
I've always said that hacktivists tend to be external because they're going after an agenda that they have to push. In the case of Anonymous, it started out they were they were like WikiLeaks before WikiLeaks got cool, and then you also have your hacktivism like eco sites, that jump on like government websites and they're like, here's the actual stats of carbon emission, or stop eating cows, stuff like that. So I always kind of pegged them as external because they're actively going after something to kind of broadcast a message.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you. Most of the time, hacktivists are going to be classified as an external classification. There are times, and we'll cover this down in insiders, but there are times when people have been found to be inside of an organization and disagree with the motivations of that organization, whether they're a government or an enterprise or a company. Some people would even put Edward Snowden in this category. They say Snowden was an activist. He was politically opposed to the actions of the government, and so he abused his privileges to be an internal hacktivist. The book gives that as an example. I don't think it's a great one. I think he falls much more clearly into the insiders section. Hacktivists, as I've seen them, like Nick said, are external. They're trying to upset or disrupt services in order to get attention, to either create political pressure or to create media attention, right? We've seen this with Anonymous attacking the Air Force's websites. We've seen the Palestinian Authority attack Israeli websites, the Ukrainians attacking Russian websites currently. It doesn't always have to be politically motivated, but it often is politically motivated. Another thing about hacktivists, their level of sophistication and capability, which is one of the classifications we talked about, is surprisingly high in instances where they get enough people together. So sometimes hacktivists will build super good tools that would usually be used by script kiddies, and they'll distribute them very broadly. When the war started between Ukraine and Russia, I joined some underground groups that we'll talk about later on the deep web. And one of those groups, they were distributing tools that had been written to attack Russian finance websites. And those tools were extremely sophisticated and at a high level of sophistication and capability. And they were giving that capability to anybody who would join the fight. So what they had done is they had written a program that came pre-programmed with targets of Russian finance companies, Russian banks, Russian defense companies, Russian government websites, anything like that. And anybody who ran the program on their site or on their computer would start attacking the Russians. Something that people wouldn't have been able to do before, but all of a sudden you now had, I think at the peak, the group had around 350,000 active attackers at a single instance. So their level of sophistication shoots up. Resources and funding usually aren't there. Despite the tools that they may have and be able to adapt to make them more sophisticated, like any activist group that might go out and march or something, they often don't have the resources and funding to maintain their movement for a long period of time, right? They're going to be able to perform larger actions against large targets possibly, but they won't have the ability to sustain those actions over time. They're kind of hit do the thing they need to do, get the attention they want to get, provide the political or talking points or media points that they want to provide, and then move on. And the same thing with intent and motivation. Intent and motivation is usually very easy to understand because they're saying you're doing X and we don't like you doing X, and so we're doing Y in response. If you want to know what their intent is to keep you from doing X. Any questions on Hacktivist? Okay, cool. Let's talk about criminal syndicates. Criminal syndicates are going to be the ones that laypersons run into most often. So as a layperson, if you're not working in the cybersecurity field, it's less likely that you're going to run into a script kiddie unless your neighbor's, son or daughter's screwing with your computer across the local network or something along those lines, or you go into a coffee shop and somebody's messing with you. You may run into hacktivists every now and then. They may take down a target. You may be like, oh, I went to go look at this service. I want to go look at Disney Plus, and it was down because of whatever. There was a message there or something like that, but it's highly unlikely. Criminal syndicates are who you as a layperson are going to deal with almost exclusively. They're going to be the people who call you on the phone and try and get you to go buy gift cards, iTunes gift cards. They're going to be people who call your grandparents and tell them that they're calling from Microsoft and that they've infected their computer. They're going to be the people who ransomware the computer that you're working on. So if you've ever been working with a computer and it told you that your files were encrypted and you needed to pay money or call a phone number, all those are going to be attributed back to criminal syndicates. Guys who are in the field already and people who aren't in the field, what conversations do we need to have around those? Because this topic gets really deep for a second, and I want to hit the high points, but if there's anything that anybody wants to ask or contribute before I get into the deeper part, let's go ahead and bring it out so I can work it into the discussion. Anything here? All right. There are 6 categories of criminal syndicate behavior that's been defined by the IOCTA, and the IOCTA is an Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment Team. They're with Europol, and they found that almost all organized criminal syndicate activity falls into one of these 6 areas. If you're following along in your book, this is going to be, I believe, on physical page 88. Somebody can check me on that if you guys are looking in your book. If you're taking notes at home, it should be between 87 and 89 regardless. One is going to be cyber-dependent crime, and we'll talk about these more in depth, but they include ransomware, data compromise, distributed denial of service attacks, website defacement, and attacks against critical infrastructure. In my day-to-day life, this is mostly what I deal with as a cybersecurity professional. Ransomware is a really big one. Ransomwaring is where you infect a computer and you encrypt that data so that the data is not usable. And then, like we talked about in chapter 1, where encryption requires a key, once you lock that person's data up, you then sell them the key to that information. Hence the name ransomware, ransom software. You're ransoming them back their data. Data compromise is usually where you leak or steal data or modify data. So if we're looking at our CIA triad, we're trying to maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This data compromise is going to mess up our confidentiality of our data, and it's going to mess up the integrity of our data. Then we have distributed denial of service attacks. Distributed denial of service attacks are like what we talked about with Ukraine and the weapons that were being handed out early on in the conflict. You're distributing this attack surface across a ton of people, in the Ukrainians' case, over 300,000 people. And you're having them contact other infrastructure from their computer in order to take down infrastructure. So to give you an idea about how this works, imagine that you have 5 phone lines into your business, and I don't like you and I don't want you to be able to do business. And so I get myself and 8 other people to pick up the phone, and they all start calling you, and we tie up all your phone lines, right? You answer the phone, hello, this is so-and-so. Can you please hold? Hello, this is so-and-so. Can you please hold? Hello, can you please hold? Please hold, please hold. Right, and I tie up all the lines. And then you come back on the phone and I ask you for nonsense, or I berate you or whatever, and you hang up the phone and you go to the next person. In the meantime, I'm redialing the phone to exhaust all your telephone lines. That would be a denial of service attack or a distributed denial of service attack, but then ramp that up by tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. You'll see distributed denial of service attacks where hundreds of thousands of computers at once will try and contact a website, and servers and websites usually aren't scaled for that kind of behavior, and so when they get those kinds of requests, they fall over. The service crashes or the service becomes unusable to the people who want it. Lots of times, like using a low orbital ion cannon, the LOIC software, you'll make the request, and then as soon as they answer the request, you hang up and disconnect the request. But because we're able to do that with software, you can do it tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times in a 60-second period, making that resource just completely unusable. Are there any questions about DDoS attacks before we move on? Because this will be something we talk about. It's a pretty prevalent attack type, and it's also something that criminal syndicates sell as a service, and so we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. Anything from the team? Any commentary from those inside security versus any questions from those outside security?
Well, I guess I'll just say one thing, which is that if you're coming into the field, you're watching this later, the DDoS, the distributed denial of service attack, is probably, like Justin said, one of the oldest, but also it's been adapted over and over and over and over again. It's like the flu. Each time that, like Cloudflare, they're like, we beat this thing. We've got this. We're redundant. Nobody's going to take us down. A year later, Cloudflare's got a massive crash because somebody figured out exactly how to beat their stuff. It's classic. I don't see it ever going away. It's something to definitely know about because there is defense in depth, which I know we're not touching right now about it, but it's such a foundational thing to know. So just a really good chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're one of the bad guys, this would be your bread and butter. This would be absolutely like one of the first things you would go towards if you had the infrastructure or the support to pull it off. And when I said that bad guys sell this as a service, you can actually go online. Let's say I use this as an example. One of the students has a restaurant, and let's say there was a rival restaurant in your town, and they launch a new order by website service, right? And you can go online, or they launch an app or whatever, and you're behind and you don't have that service. You don't have a website. This is going to cause strategic risk for your company because you didn't have this kind of thing, and they did. And so you decide you're going to do something about it. There are actual criminal syndicates that you could go and say, I want to take this website offline. I'll pay you with Bitcoin, which we'll talk about cryptocurrencies in a later class. I want to pay with an anonymous or pseudo-anonymous form of payment. They agree to take the payment, and then they're based in a country outside of the United States' jurisdiction, or the country that you're inside of, outside of their jurisdiction, and they will perform a DDoS attack on your behalf against the targets that you provide them. So if you're Walmart, you might perform this against Kmart or Target. If you're Coke, you might do Pepsi. If you're Taco Bell, you might do Wendy's, whatever it is. If you're Bob, you might do it against Alice because you don't like Alice or she turns you down for a date or whatever. There's all kinds of number of things, but this is a service that they sell. So denial of service means denial of the service that was trying to be provided. So if you went into a restaurant and tried to order food and I punched the waiter in the face and didn't let him take your order, that would be a denial of service. But also bad guys will sell this as a service. Denial of service as a service. So try and keep up with those acronyms. Anyway, keep on going. The next one that criminal syndicates may use that's cyber-dependent crime is website defacement, which is just going to a website and defacing it, right? Changing the content that's there by hosting pornography, child sexual assault material, violent or graphic material that people wouldn't want to see. There's any number of things, but anything to destroy the reputation of the company or organization being targeted. So when we talked about reputational risk before and operational risk, your ability to provide services, that's where these website defacements come in. And then finally, attacks against critical infrastructure. This is the one I deal with, being in a business that deals with food and beverage delivery and with logistics for delivery. Attacks against our critical infrastructure would prevent us from providing our core service, which means we're not able to provide food and beverage or whatever. we're trying to deliver across the United States. So that's cyber-dependent crime. If you go into information security as a business, this will be what you deal with most of the time. So are there any questions about those cyber-dependent crime before we move into the other options? Okay, cool. The next one is going to be child sexual exploitation. This is going to include child pornography, abuse, and solicitation. There's been a huge movement in the last few years to try and legitimize the pornography that's available on the internet and available in general. Regardless of that, there are still people who deal in illegal content, abusive content, and solicited content of minors in this country and others. I won't go too deep into this, but if you're going into this field, it's a reality. It's something that you may be asked to deal with from a human resources perspective, as far as dealing with employees who may attempt to access this kind of material. Criminal enterprises may sell this material. They may host this material on one of your servers in order to make it available to people without having to tie it to infrastructure that they own, etc. So while the class doesn't touch greatly on it, know that it is a part of the job, just like if you were in law enforcement or something else, and it is something that we have to deal with sometimes. I will say, in my career, I have not, in the last 5 years, personally had to view it or look for it or find it or anything like that. So if you're worried about that, that's not necessarily part of the job. But you may be asked to assess it based on like hashes, like we talked about last week. There's hashes of known databases for material like this, and you may be asked to compare employees' laptop contents to those hash databases or something along those lines. Any questions about child sexual exploitation material and criminal elements? Cool.
Hey,
I was hoping that.
Hear me, Justin?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
One thing in this field, guys, even if you're not in security, if you get into working on home computers and things like that, as a technician, by law, if you run into it, you're obligated to report it as well.
That is a great point, Brian, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I didn't even think to cover responsible or mandatory reporting laws. Depending on the state that you live in, it may be more specific as to how it's covered, but child sexual assault material and other CSAM-like material will be covered by certain laws that do make you a mandatory reporter. So just like if you were a daycare worker and somebody told you something had happened to them or they were being abused, you may be obligated to report that. That somebody was in possession of those files or had access to that type of material, etc. So, yeah, good point, Brian. Any questions there about mandatory reporting? Okay. Cool. Payment fraud. Payment fraud is another category for criminal syndicates. Payment fraud is going to be anything that includes like credit card fraud or business email compromises. Lots of times, and I've taught like an entire 2-hour course on this recently on business email compromises, but basically a business email compromise can be I break into a vendor's website. We'll go back to the restaurant analogy. Let's say somebody delivers hamburgers to the restaurant and I break into the hamburger delivery guy's email address and I send the restaurant owner an email and I say, hey, restaurant owner, we need you to send $15,000 for the patties that we dropped off last week or whatever. Here's the number, and the restaurant owner thinks, oh, okay, cool, yeah. I always talk to my guy via email. I do payments via email. It's not a problem. Let me jump on here and do this wire transfer real quick, and then they're out the money. And then payment fraud, just straight up stealing your credit card number, running credit card numbers on sites, running stolen credit card numbers on sites, selling credit card numbers, buying credit card numbers, and repackaging those for sale or for subscription services. There's a million different ways that they can abuse online payment options and payment fraud. So if we have any questions on payment fraud, or do we have any questions on payment fraud? Okay, let's keep going. Next is going to be dark web activity. I was supposed to make a slide for this. Let's see if I did real quick. I did not, so I'll just tell you guys about it. And I'll make a note in the recording to go back and add that. There is the dark web, there is the deep web, and there is the surface web. Anybody want to take a guess at the difference between them? Sarah, what do you think the surface web might be, man?
Easily accessed by the lay people.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You're right on target. Surface web is going to be the surface of the internet. It's all the normal stuff that you can see. A lot of the internet that you use from day to day will be on the surface web, right? You go to Google, you go to Yahoo, you go to a news outlet, all of those things. If you go and look at a blog, if you go and look at my blog, if you go and look at whatever, YouTube, all that's going to be on the surface web. It's all things that there's no gate between you and it. You can just look at it and get to it, and it's there. The next option is going to be the deep web. Mason, do you have audio, man? He did not come off mute. It's okay. Who else is here? Terry, what about you? What about the deep web? What might the deep web be? We know what the surface web is. We've got deep and dark. Nothing? Okay, we may have lost Terry. Brandy, what about you? Brandy and Marty. Any guesses on the deep web?
Not really.
Okay, perfect, great. That's why it's an introductory course, right? So it's all good. We'll just chop up this part and edit it out. What you got, Nick? What's on the deep web?
Deep web is going to be the back end stuff that you don't typically get to see. So it's going to be like your, private organizations, things like that. Your servers and that sort of stuff. It's kind of handling all the back end stuff.
Yeah, lots of
applications and all that.
Absolutely, and or anything that's gate kept, right? So, like Facebook, for the most part, is the deep web. A majority of Facebook is not open to the world, right? Because of privacy controls. If you post things on your profile, they're behind a login. You got to be a member of that site to participate in it, to look at it, and those kind of things. Same things with certain forums that are closed. Our own Discord, our Discord's on the deep web, right? You can't just go to our Discord without knowing it's there and browse through the topics and look at conversations and that kind of stuff. You had to be invited into this class tonight, right? This is all part of the deep web. It's all stuff that's under the surface and requires some kind of gate to pass through to get into. So you'll run into a lot of stuff where you see things on the surface web versus the deep web, and then you see the dark web. The dark web is a huge topic, but for your all's purposes and for knowing what it is for this test, is that the dark web is a place that usually caters to those who are looking for extreme privacy and anonymity, usually with the intent of providing illegal services. So if you're taking notes at home, looking for extreme privacy and anonymity in order to provide illegal services or to obtain illegal services. There's special software that's required to run a website on the dark web, and there's special software that's required to access things on the dark web, and that software is going to be called the Tor browser, T-O-R, Tor browser. Lots of dark web services exist. One of the most popular is a few years ago there was a dark web service called Silk Road, and Silk Road was a website that would allow you to purchase fake currency. It would allow you to purchase drugs for delivery. It would allow you to purchase weapons, and in some cases would allow you to purchase people or participate in human sex trafficking. That was eventually shut down because of a number of reasons, but took a very long time to locate and to shut down because it was all running on the dark web. So dark web stuff is extremely difficult for laypersons to find. It's also difficult to find if you don't know it's there. Instead of using easy to find names like Google is an easy to find name, or USA Today or weather.com, dark web services will use a cryptographic hash, which is usually something like 26 characters as a name. And so unless you have that 26 character hash or somebody provides it to you, it's often not easy to locate services on the dark web. Talk about them more in depth, but generally you can think of the dark web as something that requires special software to get to, and usually as a way to hide services on the internet in order to provide illegal services. Right? Any questions about the dark web? I know media loves to talk about the dark web. Journalists and television loves to talk about the dark web.
I was going to say, I just listened to a podcast about Darknet Diaries about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Darknet Diaries is like one of the best things ever. If you're interested in, even if you don't pursue this as a career field at all, if you're interested in cybersecurity at all, Jack Jack Resider and Darknet Diaries is an awesome podcast to listen to. They talk about all kinds of tech stuff from an information security angle. He interviews black hats, he interviews white hats, he interviews gray hats, feds. It's crazy, some of the people that he gets to go on the show. Absolutely awesome content. So thanks, Spotted US, for sure. Next one is going to be terrorism as a criminal activity. Terrorism is pretty straightforward, right? Either terrorists are going to be using these actions, the payment fraud and those kind of things, to solicit donations or to gain access to funds or to gain access to information or to prevent the use of services by a country or organization that they don't agree with, right? That one's pretty clear cut. Sort of like hacktivism, but they consider terrorists to be a criminal organization because they usually have a monetary gain as well in order to collect followers online or collect donations from followers, etc. So terrorism is its own group in this. And then cross-cutting crime factors, just like with risk. I look at this as one that covers a big swath of the rest of them, but cross-cutting crime factors, the book defines as social engineering, money mules, and the criminal abuse of cryptocurrencies. These are all kind of illegal adjacent. They're all things that aren't technically illegal, like you're not actually doing a bad thing necessarily, but it is morally incorrect, and it does benefit the bad guys. So a very common one is money muling. If you've ever had an older family member who tells you that they're caught up in a romance scam and somebody's sending them money, they love them and they're sending them money and they just need to forward it on to them, or they need to receive a package and then forward that package on. Often those people are indirectly involved in money muling. They're not aware that they're receiving stolen funds, they're not aware that they're handling stolen goods, and they're generally not aware that they're passing on those stolen goods or stolen funds, but they're often involved in it. Any conversation or questions about those criminal syndicates or about the different categories?
I was going to bring up for the money muling, one of the things that you guys might see just in your email inbox really picked up around the time of COVID and really hasn't stopped is the emails offering you a work from home job where all you got to do is just be a package handler. They're going to get your address. They're going to just send you boxes, and all you have to do is just take it down to the UPS store and send it on its merry way. And of course, they're going to pay you like $2,000, a week or some stuff. So it's just bogus. But that is an example where you were unwittingly complicit in something that it could be as simple as they're just trying to dodge tariffs. So they're having you move product without sending it through customs. You could be sending stuff that is, completely legal. There's no way to tell. So that's a really good example if you're thinking of like real world stuff that you may run into, because one of the things that helped me a lot was what can I put these lessons to with stuff that I run into? And then I read on this and then I saw it in my email and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, somebody's trying to give you a lot of money to do a task that seems a little bit fishy or that you're not getting all the questions answered on, especially online. You're probably money muling or something along those lines, right? Any transfer of objects or money where you're being paid to do one of those things, something's up. So good conversation, good content. Do we have any questions? Or what questions do we have about those 6 different things? Again, the 6 are cyber-dependent crime, child sexual exploitation, payment fraud, the dark web, terrorism, and cross-cutting crime factors. All right. We're going to do, let's see how many more we can do. We're going to do 3 more categories. We're going to finish out this slide, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break. Unlike you guys, I'm tied here to this chair during this period, and so I'll stop the recording during that time, and I'll step away, and then we'll pick back up right after that. So that'll give everybody a chance to refresh their drinks. I'm out of water, and to hit the restroom if they need to. So let's talk about advanced persistent threats. Advanced persistent threats are often going to be the ones that you deal with if you're in this as a job, if you're dealing with an enterprise, a corporation, or a government. Advanced persistent threats are usually external, again, using those categories that we talked about before, those classifications. Their level of sophistication is usually going to be high. Their level of resources and funding is usually going to be high. And their intent and motivation on a personal level is they're probably collecting a paycheck. They're probably getting paid by somebody to attack you. They're an employee, and they're working on behalf of their national government or on behalf of a criminal syndicate in order to take you out. And those criminal syndicates can be employed by national governments, and we'll talk about that more in a later class. But advanced persistent threats are usually always there, and they're specifically focused on you. For some reason, your organization, your government department, your enterprise, whatever, has something that they want or need. This could be to try and locate intellectual property. They may be trying to steal patents or steal information about what your company is doing or what they plan to do. This can be particularly relevant if you work for a defense contractor or if you're in the military. They're always persistently, hence the name, threatening your organization and trying to get into your organization. As a company, we actually work with other companies on our threat intelligence, which we'll talk about later in this chapter tonight. We work with companies to identify APTs, advanced persistent threats, that are targeting people who do business in the same vertical that we do business. We want to know who's attacking food and beverage manufacturers and logistics companies, because those APTs are most likely to attack us. If you're in the government, you may want to know who attacks the U.S. government the most often, because those are the people you need to defend against. Let's stop really quickly and let's take questions or comments from the group around APTs. It seems pretty straightforward to me, but I've been in this for a while. So, do we have any questions about APTs? I don't want to skate over this one, but this one isn't as deep. They're just people that are very well funded and are spending all their time focusing on you and others like you because of something that you provide, either a service or knowledge that you possess that they can obtain. Okay, I'll go ahead and move forward then. A lot of people don't have.
I'll tell you, I'm not. Would the CIA be an advanced persistent threat, considering?
I'm having a really hard time getting audio from you. It sounds like you said, was the CIA considered an advanced persistent threat?
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. The CIA is considered an advanced persistent threat. This is a great question. The only thing that makes somebody good or bad is what side they're on, right? From a moral standpoint, you can assign moral responsibility to the people who are performing the hacks. But breaking into a piece of software or defeating a technical control in a computer system is itself an amoral act. If I get the computer to let me see a file that I shouldn't be able to see, there's nothing immoral about that. Maybe I need the directions to something and they're locked in my wife's computer or whatever, and I trick the computer into letting me see the file. Something like that. However, if I overcome the controls on my computer in order to steal nuclear secrets, right, or whatever, then that's a different story. Same action, right? I was still just defeating computer controls, but it was the intent of my actions that mattered. The CIA is absolutely an advanced persistent threat. If other organizations out there are doing things in opposition to the CIA, or that the CIA wants to know about, the Tailored Access, Office of Tailored Access, TAO, I think is what it's still called. Something like that. It may be the Computer Operations Department now. I don't know what they renamed it to. But Tailored Access Operations used to be the guys who were the APTs for the CIA. They would consistently break into other countries' systems, whether it was Merkel's emails while she was the Chancellor of Germany, or Palestine or North Korea or China or whoever it is. So, yeah, I don't know if you were asking as a joke or if you were being sincere, but absolutely, like, government agencies are APTs. Just like
me talk.
It is.
I can hear you.
Sorry, I didn't know the mic was on. Keep on going.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a little bit of sincere and a little bit of humorous, but that's interesting.
But yeah, it brings up a good point. Like, we generally name APTs. This is super goofy and annoying, but people do it. APTs are usually named off two characteristics. They're usually named off a national animal, and then they're usually named with a attribute or an adjective. And so, like a lot of the ones out of China will be named like sneaky panda, or evil panda, or sleepy panda, or whatever. So, in the information security community, we know that panda is the designation for Chinese attackers, and then different groups get different attributes just based on whatever the thing is. Another animal that's used is spider. Another one might be fox. Another one might be jackal. I think Egypt is jackal. But those.
Typically, criminal organization.
Oh yeah, you're right. Spider is a criminal organization specifically. So those different animals are used as to help you code APTs, and then they're given values or adjectives. Just best I can tell, just based on fun. Whoever identifies them first gets to name them, and they come up with ridiculous stuff. But they're absolutely APT designations for the U.S. government for any of the Five Eyes governments, which is Britain, Australia, the U.S., Canada, and New Zealand, I think is Five Eyes. Anyway. Questions there or additional conversation? Yeah, go ahead.
What you're saying, Justin, a lot of people get stuck on the idea that APTs are always government-run organizations specifically, or governments in general. In a lot of cases they are, because of the resources they have available to them, obviously. But there's a lot of hacking groups out there that are also work in conjunction with government organizations. That way the government can use that whole concept of plausible deniability when it comes to saying, well, you attacked us. They can say, no, we didn't attack you, it was this group. You know what I mean? But then that group is actually funded by maybe the government of a certain country. So,
yes, absolutely. I'm going to provide that as additional reading. There's a white paper from the Atlantic Council that talks about attribution and whether or not attribution is something that we can always define, or something that we just have to be comfortable putting into a vague category. And those vague categories that they provide sometimes are state-sponsored and state-allowed, which means state-sponsored is the state's actually paying that hacking group to continue to provide that service to attack people or to attack certain companies or something. Knowing who the APTs are that are targeting you and your peers in your industry vertical, whether it be private business, public business, or the government, is going to make a huge difference in how you do security once you start doing specialized security. So there's a baseline that everybody should be doing all the time, and then there's additional defenses that you build on top of that. And what those additional defenses look like will be dependent on who the APTs are that you have to deal with. Cool. Good conversation all the way around. Any comments or questions from the Peanut Gallery, or from guys who are outside of the industry right now? We can talk for hours about this. This is just kind of what we do. All right, we'll keep going. Next is going to be insiders. So insiders, we kind of covered insiders before. Insiders, I think, are some of the most dangerous. There's the least number of protections against insiders most often. So if you think about the things that you have access to in companies that you've worked for, there's usually the least number of checks and balances against internal people who have access to things, right? Lots of times you'll get access to a system, and maybe you're given more access than you need, or nobody really keeps tabs or checks on what you're doing once you get that access. They may make a big deal about whether or not you can have access, and then once you get the access, nobody pays attention to you. So insiders can be particularly dangerous. Like I said, I put Snowden into this category. If people have been paying attention to what Snowden was doing inside the NSA, then and they had had a good insider threat program, then they would have identified his behavior and his him being disgruntled and upset, and his access to all the different materials, and been able to stop him before the leaks happened, right? We can have an argument another day about whether or not morally they should have stopped him. That's neither here nor there. Just talking about the things, or the controls around what he was able to do. Insiders are often very dangerous. Looking at our categories, one of the reasons that they're so dangerous is because they're already inside. A lot of the times when we're dealing with security, people think of security as a castle with a moat, and they think that that moat is their security and that they're protecting people from getting inside. And so they spend all their time and money and energy working on keeping people from getting onto the network, and then they don't do anything to protect the different areas of the network or to keep people from moving about once they get inside the network. So an internal attacker already has access. Their level of sophistication is usually low unless they know the systems that they're working in. Some of the people who work here, or who are here in the chat tonight, who are employed in cybersecurity, it would be extremely dangerous to have them inside of a network that they were familiar with because they're cybersecurity professionals. Their level of sophistication is going to be very high. Same thing, somebody in our finance department, I may not recognize malicious transfers, but somebody in our finance department could probably run circles around me and make the books look like whatever they wanted to. So their level of sophistication with their particular business area may be very high. They usually won't have resources or funding. They may have a lot of intent and motivation. If they've been screwed over or what they feel like they've been screwed over or slighted by a company or an organization, they may do everything they can to take it out. I worked a situation recently where a person left a company after a long period of years, what would be considered an unthinkable amount of years for most of us to stay with a single company, but they left that company. They had a extreme amount of access because they had been with the company for so long. They initially had internal access, and they were very motivated. They felt like they had been very slighted by this company, and so they did everything that they could to hurt that company. Everything that they knew how to do, they used at their disposal. So while they didn't have a lot of resources and a lot of funding, just one person was very upset. They were able to wield that internal access and their intent to cause a lot of problems. Any questions about insiders? Okay. If you guys are following along in your book, you need to take a special note. There's a section here that I'm not covering tonight, but that is inside the course material called Shadow IT. And so I do want you guys to read that blob and know about it. Basically, Shadow IT is when people can't get things done through appropriate processes, then they find a way to get it done. So if they can't install a piece of software that they want to use, they might use a website that does the same thing. You don't give them the equipment they want. They go and buy their own equipment and hook it to their machine, etc. It does a good job of covering it in that blob. It's not a key objective for this chapter, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's something that you'll have to deal with.
It's also something that's incredibly relevant when you get in the workplace. You see it quite often because there's always going to be somebody who's going to want to find a workaround to whatever security control you might put in place or whatever block you might put in place.
That's actually a good point.
Just a quick overview of something I had experienced about in the last 2 months. We had and it was actually someone who told on themselves, but they didn't realize they were telling on themselves. And what they did was they sent in a case to us, basically saying, "Hey, we cannot access this website." Because we had it blocked through our tool, which was Cisco Umbrella, and we said, okay, well, looked at the website, and we're like, well, why are you trying to get to this? And they said, well, there's about 70-something other people that use it too, and our manager is using it, and they said that it's okay for us to use, and we're like, that was never approved by us. We never said it was okay, and who's your manager? So then we reached out to the manager and we got onto them and said, why are you using this? Why do you have 70 other people that are using it? And who is it approved by? You need to give us the documentation so that we can look it over. And they said, oh, well, we were just using it to collaborate. And we're like, okay, well, it still has to go through a vetting process, right? And so that was an instance where that was kind of shadow IT. People were needing something to collaborate with, and we didn't have it in-house to offer it to them. So they found a way externally to our organization to do it. And the problem is somebody was using a private account they had with this website to set up a share with 70 other people in our organization, and they were all collaborating in documents in this person's personal, personal account on this share on this website.
For sure.
That's when you have data that's outside your organization that's not in your not in your hands. You can't do anything about it, and that becomes a huge issue. So.
That's a great point, Nick, and that actually keys exactly on Chapter 1, something we talked about in Chapter 1. If you guys remember, we talked about data loss prevention. So Nick just brought up a very good point. Nick has lost the confidentiality of his data. No, it's not Nick's fault directly, right? Somebody in his organization, they don't have the controls to prevent insiders from maliciously or outside of policy making use of their data. So if they had appropriate data loss protection controls in place, they would be able to put data from their network up into this cloud service and collaborate. But just like in Jurassic Park, life finds a way, and users will find a way to get the work done that they need to get done, and that will often result in shadow IT will result in you losing the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data. So it's a good point.
The problem in this case wasn't necessarily that they're pulling data out. It's that they're actually creating data outside of our organization, but for
Outside of the control.
That
Oh
makes
yeah,
sense.
absolutely. I've seen that occur where when that person left the organization, they also took access with them to that resource, and then the company lost the availability of their data because that person was gone. I can't make an employee who doesn't work for me give me back something that was never mine, right?
Exactly.
Go ahead,
Hey,
Brian. I don't want to lose you, man. Go ahead.
There's something else in that too. When we talk about the insider threat, depending on what facet you go into for security, for cybersecurity, there are policies and procedures that you put in place that may or may not be followed, maybe an acceptable risk depending on the risk appetite of the company. Where if you have certain controls that aren't followed, like password resets, rotations, things like that, if they don't follow that, then you have an insider threat that can be carried on for a long period of time. So as you get into the different roles, whether it's governance or risk or engineering or designing those controls, you have to think about that sometimes the insiders will have more leverage because you're not following policies and procedures that need to be put in place. So you have to think about that when you're designing things as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. And yeah, guys, if you're tying this back to the concepts we covered in chapter 1, what Brian just spoke to was something that we talked about before, where we were talking about risk and then compensated controls because people go outside of a policy or outside of a control that's put in place. So we'll get more into risk in another chapter, but he brought up some key terms. If you guys are taking notes, one of the vocabulary terms you need to think about is risk acceptance. And if you don't understand risk acceptance, we need to talk about it later and talk about what that means more in depth. So if I don't cover it effectively, you guys make sure you hold me accountable and say, hey, you told us to ask you about this, and make sure we knew what was going on. So make sure you know about that. The final one that we're going to talk about before the break is going to be competitors. Competitors may engage in corporate espionage. This is pretty straightforward. People who are, like we talked about with the two competing restaurants and one DDoSing the other, that would be your competitors presenting themselves as a threat actor, right? They're doing things to try and prevent you from performing your business role. Competitors may also pay insiders. They may fund insiders, which can make insiders even more dangerous, but they may try and exploit strategic risk, find out what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it in order to do it before you or better than you or for less money than you or whatever. Or they may seek out some of the services from the criminal syndicates to gain access to information, to pay to break into your information, to exploit operational risk, to ransomware you and prevent you from performing services or whatever. So competitors is pretty straightforward. Does anyone have any questions about competitors? This is going to be the one that you'll least often hear about because even though it happens, it doesn't get publicized as often because people generally don't get caught. It's unlikely that Booz Allen Hamilton is going to do corporate espionage on Boeing in a way that's attributable to them, right, and gets them caught. So anybody who's bothering to do this is probably not very good at it. Any questions there or comments? Okay. It's currently 8:45. I'm going to be back at the desk at 8:50. I'm going to stop the recording here. I'm going to take a quick bio break and refresh these, some water and some Coke. Keep going. I would encourage you guys to do the same. Please don't leave the chat if you don't have to. Just mute or do whatever you need to do to stop your video, and I'll be back shortly. We'll see how it goes. I'll see you. This runs till 9:30, so if you guys are here, that's okay. If you guys aren't, just shoot me a text. All right, guys. Quick sound check. Everything's still good. Everybody can hear.
Sound good to me.
All right, perfect. How's everybody doing with the material tonight so far? Let's talk through that. Anything that anybody is having trouble with, or anybody that anything that didn't make sense that we need to go back and recover that we know is going to be an issue later, or everybody keeping up and doing pretty well tonight? You can just we've all everybody who's been here who's in cybersecurity has been the least knowledgeable person in the room previously, right? So don't be afraid to speak up and I mean, you can still be afraid, but speak up anyway, and say like, hey, I'm not getting this, or we need to talk about this, because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to help each other out. We're not here to judge each other or shame each other or give each other a hard time. Somebody may rib on you a little bit or crack a joke on you, but overall, everybody's here to make sure that you're successful, and that if you want to be in the cybersecurity field, you get to be, and that you're successful when you're in it. So, anything? Any questions about cybersecurity in general? Maybe not specific to the topics we talked about tonight, but just in general while we still have some of the guys who are in here.
It mostly sounds like magic. I don't think I could formulate a coherent question.
Most of it is magic. There's Clark's law that says any advanced enough technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? It seems like that is first. I thought originally that I wouldn't be able to get into information security because I didn't have enough technical knowledge. And I thought, man, I'm really going to have to learn how all these things work under the hood. I'm going to have to get rid of all this obfuscation and think like, oh yeah, that's a computer. And I'm going to have to like understand the nuts and bolts of the computer, like down to specific points. And there are times when I need to. There are times when I need to understand the topic inside and out. But just like we talked about being T-shaped in chapter 1, and being a T-shaped engineer or a T-shaped cybersecurity professional, you'll find the same thing here. I don't understand a ton about encryption and how encryption works under the hood. Most of the time I say encryption works and I can explain it with metaphors, and you ask me about the types of encryption, I can tell you about them. But I can't do the math. I don't know why the math works. There are magic numbers, and if you put data into the magic number box, it will give you encrypted data using a key of your choosing. And if you do it with hashes, they'll be whatever defined length that they are, always, no matter what, and it is indistinguishable from magic. I have no idea how it works. So
add on to what Justin's saying, I mean, there's going to be a lot of times as you traverse this career path that you're going to question yourself as like, are you, you're going to sit there and say, am I good enough for this? Am I going to be able to do this? And I don't think that's an uncommon feeling for anybody going into this field. You just need to know that you're not the only one that feels that way. That pretty much everybody that goes into it, for the most part, at some point in time or another, feels that way. I mean, even after finishing my bachelor's degree and having 8 certifications, I still sat around thinking, am I good enough to get into this? Like, do I know enough to do this? Do I know enough to get into the field and get a job in the field and like be successful in it? And I think that's part of it, though, right? I mean, part of wanting to get into cybersecurity, part of getting into the security field in general, is that not you don't know everything all the time, and you're not ever going to. But it's the idea of wanting to work towards it and wanting to keep pressing yourself to learn more and more all the time. You're not ever going to know everything. That's just not
Yep.
how it works, and you have to accept that. But you also have to accept the fact that you have to keep working at it, and you have to keep the pressure up on yourself to want to seek out that knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of what's called autodidactic learning available for cybersecurity. Autodidactic just meaning you teach yourself, right? So there's lots of things that if you want to learn something, you can just go out and learn it. And the reason why Crow's Nest exists, and the reason why Nick and I and others have built this, is so that we have a place where we don't understand things. When we don't understand things, we can go and pick each other up, or go to a group of peers and say, hey, I'm not getting this. This isn't clicking. I need to be able to secure this. I'm concerned about this. Help me understand it, right? And then we help each other, right? Because that's what we're here for. So I think you'll find that more often than not across the cybersecurity field. We've all been the nerds. We've all not known. We've all been the new guy, gal, and we all want to pick each other up and pull each other up the ladder. And if they don't, then don't work with them. Forget them. Go work somewhere else, because who wants to deal with people like that, right? So, all right, cool. Good talk. Let's get back into the recording, and we'll get back to the slides for tonight. So we're going to be going through threat vectors, and then we're going to be talking about some open source intelligence. At the beginning, I gave you guys the different categories that we would be covering. So we're going to talk about threat vectors. These are things that actors are going to exploit. So as an actor, if you're a threat actor, you want to figure out what thing you can use to get your objectives completed. You want to figure out what things you can use to exploit those risks that we talked about in Chapter 1. And so there are 6 types of access that you need to know. Consequently, if you're defending a network, there's 6 types of access that you need to defend. And if you want to attack a network, there's 6 types to attack, right? And they're the same 6. The number one, and this has been prevalent since about 2003, this is the number one way that bad guys get in, is via email and social media. Whether it's phishing, which we'll talk about in depth later, business email compromise, social media scams, etc. The number one way that bad guys get access to your networks, whether it's a government network, an enterprise network, or a corporate network, is going to be via email and social media. Email is one of those necessary evils. We have to receive email. We have to send email. There's a certain amount of implicit trust. Implicit meaning the trust is built into the transaction. There's a certain amount of implicit trust in email. I send it to you, and you believe that the person that sent it is the person who sent it because it says that it came from that person. When I send it, I expect it to go to the person that I sent it to. So it's all pretty straightforward, and I expect that the contents of that email didn't change between the 2 people, that whatever was sent was received. But in reality, email works a lot like the original mail system. You write on your envelope who you are. You can write anybody. You could write Abraham Lincoln on your envelope. It doesn't mean it actually came from Abraham Lincoln, but when it arrives, it'll say it came from Abraham Lincoln. You can write any target or recipient on the email that you want. And then you drop it in the mailbox, and it goes to the next mailbox, right? Or it goes to the postal office, and then it goes to the next post office, and the next post office, and then it gets handed down to a carrier, and that carrier puts it in their truck, and they bring it to your address spot, or to your mailbox rather. It's the same kind of thing with email. Emails get sent around the world. When an email's sent, it gets looked to see where it needs to go to, what set of servers it needs to go to. It gets sent to those servers. They review it, they process it, they hand it down to another server. That server figures out exactly what mailbox you're in, and then puts it in your mailbox, and then you're able to read it on your phone or wherever. So it's a really common way, because of all the implicit trust, for bad guys to put bad things in email to exploit you and your users. So the number one way that we see people exploited today is via email and social media. That's one of the
Justin,
most difficult ways to defend. Yeah, go for it, man.
Just to kind of add to what you said about implicit trust, so like just a quick scenario from what I've seen, had something happen recently, was where somebody had actually had an external contact that was a known contact to them, and they had an email chain going with that user. Well, the external user's email account had been hacked, and the attacker went in and they changed the header of that email. They changed the reply to the attacker's email. And so what happened was when that known trusted user had sent an email, or the attacker was in the external user's email, when he sent the reply back to the user who was thinking, okay, here I'm in an email chain with this guy, I already know who he is. When they replied to that guy, the attacker replied back to the actual attacker's email.
That's awesome. Yes.
Real quick. They were in the middle of an email chain when really they were actually replying to the attacker on his personal email.
Nice. And real quick for the audience, header of an email is like the envelope that it comes in. It tells where it came from and where it went and how the route that it took to get there. So what Nick's saying is that like the return address that was written on the envelope had been updated to be the attacker's return address in the reply to. So that's an ingenious move, and yeah, absolutely a common attack technique and a real life thing that we see. So thanks, man. You're full of examples tonight, and I'm loving it. I appreciate it greatly. I get some of the energy sucked out of me by doing online versus in-person classes because I like to, see people.
Absolutely. I think this, for me, like learning, at least coming up when I was learning a lot of things, having examples along with the material is always helpful, just to kind of understand how it might be used in the wild.
For sure. The next one we're going to talk about for a threat vector is direct access. So when we talked about risks the other day, one of the risks that we talked about was physical risks, right? Or one of the controls we talked about was physical controls. There's a reason why information security deals with fences and gates and different things to keep people physically away from things. One of the ways that attackers can exploit a weakness is via direct access. In fact, historically, the rule has always been that if a bad guy has physical access to a computer, then it's no holds barred. Like, the bad guy is going to get what they want if they have physical access to a computer. One of the most recent examples of this is that a Belgian gray hat, so remember, gray is somebody who wasn't trying to be malicious but was looking for vulnerabilities, but they weren't authorized to look for vulnerabilities, decided to attack Elon Musk's Starlink system, the systems that they actually send to people's homes, the base station and the satellite. And so the way that he did this was like $25 worth of hardware. He was a good gray hat, though. He wrote up his report, he emailed it to Elon. Elon gave him some cash. They waited a few weeks. Elon took care of the problem on their side, fixed the servers or fixed the computers, and then that guy was allowed to talk about it at DEF CON this weekend. DEF CON's a big defense conference that we'll talk about in person at another time. But because of that direct access, he was able to break into those satellites with a $25 piece of hardware. I have this happen all the time. People bring me machines and they say, oh no, my laptop's locked up and I can't get my content out of it. I can't get my files. I can't get my pictures, my photos, whatever. Because I have direct access, there's a number of things I can do. Take the computer apart, pull the hard drive out, put it in another box, read the data off of it, clear the data off of it. There's 100 things you can do if you have direct access to something. So attackers may try and gain direct access to your equipment or to your network. So they may just walk into your business or come into your business and plug into something. Or if you leave something unattended and you're not paying attention to it, they may just walk up to it and start typing. We have some people in chat who are in the medical field, right? Nick, I think you work in the medical field. Sarah, I think you may work in the same medical field. I'll introduce you guys later, but I think you may be at the same corporation. I can't tell you how many times working and just going to a hospital, since I've been a cybersecurity person, walking through a hospital where I've seen the charting carts, I don't know what you guys call them, but those carts that the nurses work off of, just unlocked and like hanging out outside of a patient's room.
Oh yeah, I was actually recently, my brother was in the hospital for a few weeks, and at the hospital that I work for. And it just so happened I was walking with him down the aisles, trying to down the hallways, trying to help him get some exercise while he was there. And while I was walking through, I just looked at every single cart to see if the machine was actually locked. And surprisingly enough, a lot of them were not locked. So people weren't locking the screens when they were walking away from the carts. So
Yeah, absolutely. So that'd be an example of direct access. Go ahead, Sarah.
So that's fairly common. We leave them logged in. The nurses will leave them logged in their rooms.
Oh yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting there, and the nurse comes in and asks me questions, and then just walks out and leaves the EMR up, and I'm just like, this would be so interesting. I've never messed with them, but at the same time, I'm like, I wonder what's in there. She's like, this lippy little bleepity bleep. We're gonna kill him later. No, I ain't kidding. But yeah. So that's an example of direct access that you guys can remember, right? Keep with you. If somebody has direct access, usually a lot of the security controls that are in place are out the window once somebody has direct access to a network or to a piece of infrastructure or hardware. Next is going to be wireless networks. It's pretty simple. You have wireless networks at your house, right? Wireless networks take the problem of direct access and make it that much worse. So instead of them needing to be on site to plug into your network or to get access to your hardware, they'll often just exploit your wireless network. Once they can get onto your wireless network from wherever they're located at, near your building, then they'll be able to get access to the things that are on that network, which are most things, right? One thing that people don't realize is that Wi-Fi has this problem where once you broadcast a Wi-Fi signal, it just keeps going until it fades out. You might think this is great. I went and bought a $50 router from the Walmart and I put it up on a shelf in my house, and now I can check my email out in the front yard or whatever you want to do. The thing is, there's this really cool tool that you guys can look up later called a Cantana. So if you're taking notes, you're looking up Cantana on YouTube. A Cantana takes something called a Yagi antenna and a Pringles can, and they put them together, and then they can sit like a mile and a half sometimes, depending on line of sight and weather conditions, sit like a mile away and receive your Wi-Fi signal or send data to your Wi-Fi network using these Cantanas. They're really crazy directional antennas. They're very inexpensive to make, and they're a huge problem for security professionals because obviously users want to be able to wirelessly use their equipment. And so we want to control how far we're broadcasting that network and the controls that we have on it. But then bad guys are going to try and extend that direct access across that wireless network. Any questions about email, social media, direct access, or wireless networks? Okay. Removable media is going to be USB drives 90% of the time. That's why I put USB drives in big letters here. But removable media could also be a floppy disk or a CD, anything that stores data that can be plugged into a computer. These are going to present their own problems. Since the 90s, there's been something called auto run in play. And auto run is a file that goes on a piece of removable media that basically says, when I'm plugged in, do X. So when a computer gets a new piece of removable media plugged into it, it'll check that auto run file and it'll say, hey, when you get plugged into me, what am I supposed to do? And it may say read a file, open a file, run a program, whatever. If you remember in the 90s, you'd put in a disk, the disk would run, hopefully, and it would launch all by itself. And if not, you'd navigate to your D drive and you'd find the auto run or whatever was there. And when you clicked it, it would start the program that you were looking for. For a more relevant and more recent example, you may remember plugging in a jump drive and the jump drive popping up or Windows popping up and saying, hey, when this jump drive's plugged in, what do you want to do? Threat actors will often exploit removable media by putting a file on there that says, when I'm plugged in, run a virus. So they take a regular jump drive, just like you get at the Walmart or wherever you buy your jump drives. Actually, if I'm an attacker, I'm probably going to buy them by the 100 from like Alibaba or some online website, cheapest ones I can get. I'm going to put viruses on them, and I'm going to write that auto run file and say, hey, when I'm plugged into something, auto run a virus that'll give me access to that person's computer, or auto run a virus that will ransomware that person's computer, etc. And I may just sprinkle those around anywhere. If I'm on a college campus, I may drop 1 or 2 or 3 in the computer labs around and wait on unsuspecting students to pick them up. If I'm targeting a specific company or government organization, I may drop them around the parking lot of that government organization, put them at the back near the bumper, so when people see them, it looks like they, oh man, I was getting my stuff out of my trunk and I dropped that, or maybe it's by the driver or passenger door, so as they go to get to their vehicle, they see it. It's a really common attack technique is to take removable media and put malicious content on it and then leave it laying around, or send it to somebody. There's a really popular attack that happened recently where these guys sent out letters to people and they said, hey, the one that you have is broke, it's not any good, and so we made you a new one and we're sending it to you as a replacement. We're really sorry about the trouble. Please enjoy your new piece of removable media. And so everybody plugged them into their computers, and then their computers all got broke into because the bad guys knew that people plug in chub drives, because that's what they do. They're otherwise opaque. You can't see what's on them. There's no real way to figure out what's here without plugging them into something, so people plug them in. There's a way around this if you're going to be a security professional or just a smart layperson. There are virtual machines, which we'll talk about later on. There's a way to plug in something and see what's on using a virtual machine. And there's also isolated machines. So you take an old machine or a machine that doesn't have any data on it, if you're in an enterprise or a company or a government, and you put it on what's considered the dirty machine, and you put it on there and you scan it with software and see if there's anything on it. And then if not, then you move it from the dirty machine to a clean machine where you know you can access it and work with the data. So questions about removable media? We have an in-class session. I'll show you guys some of my bad USBs that I use for engagements where we're doing poisonous removable media. We're trying to use bad things on USBs. It's pretty fun. Next one's going to be cloud. The cloud is anything that's not on your computer, right? So if you're talking about cloud stuff, you're talking about stuff that's not saved on your computer, a service that's not on your computer, it's being provided by somebody else. Everything that Facebook provides you, Instagram, Google, Twitter, any of those things are all in the cloud. If you use Google Sheets, if you use Gmail, if you use Hotmail, if you use any email provider that's not being hosted by you on a server in your house, you're using cloud resources. Most businesses are not hosting the things that they are using within their business, right? They're paying another company to do something better. So a lot of companies will put all their payroll, they'll have all their payroll done by a payroll company, and that'll be handled through a cloud website, right? So what happens is you take your data and you entrust it to a third party, and then attackers look at that third party and they say, I want access to that data, so I'm going to break into that cloud infrastructure. I'm going to try and get into that vendor's stuff so that I can get access to your stuff. It's a little bit different than third party, where third party is going to be when you do business with somebody and that person's doing poor cybersecurity usually, and they get attacked and broken into. And then there's implicit trust between you and that person, and the bad guy exploits that trust. So it might be going back to the mail delivery. I might know that you reject mail unless it's delivered by your specific mail carrier, right? And so I might go to your specific mail carrier and say, hey, I really want to send a bomb to Bob's house, but I know Bob only opens mail if it comes from you, so I'll pay you to deliver the bomb, right? But instead of paying them, you're just breaking into their stuff and then using the trust that they already have set up, abusing that trust that's already set up. This can happen with the supply chains, with software supply chains, with hardware or infrastructure supply chains. They can happen with material supply chains, any number of things. The CIA did this at one point where, or the NSA rather, the NSA did a thing where they were taking and stopping shipments of certain computer equipment that was leaving the company or leading the country to certain places. And before it left the country to go to certain places, they would modify the software that was on it to grant them access to it at a later time. So that person was ordering from insert name of networking company, expecting that the network gear that they were getting was safe and clean, and the CIA or NSA was attacking that supply chain, modifying that content, and then sending it on. So, any questions about these? These are important for you to know. They'll be important for you to be aware of all the different things that are in here. You'll need to know these 6. They are not the only 6 that exist. There are other things that you need to be aware of, but these are the 6 that the test focuses on. All right, let's go on. All We're talking about threat data and intelligence. Threat intelligence is a set of activities and resources that are available to cybersecurity professionals who want to know what's going on in their threat environment. So I talked about before, with advanced persistent threats, you might want to know what advanced persistent threats are attacking you and your industry vertical, because you want to know what to be on the lookout for, right? So how do we do that? We're going to do that using threat data and threat intelligence. And there's a couple of ways we can get it. There's a couple of places we can get it from. And the book is going to give you a bunch of different URLs and a bunch of specific things. I would encourage you to go to those different websites and look at them. We don't have time tonight to look through the different sites, but there's a lot of cool sites out there, a lot of them that you can sign up for free. And if you want to see, like, even if you're not a cybersecurity professional and you don't want to be a cybersecurity professional, you can still sign up for these and look and say, hey, a couple of you guys work in healthcare. I'm going to look at the healthcare things and things that are affecting the healthcare industry today, because it might be relevant, right? If people are attacking hospitals like mine because they provide a certain service or surgery, abortion's a great one, right? Let's say that your hospital system provides abortion services, or DNC or whatever, and other hospital systems that provide that service are also being attacked by hacktivists who don't believe that you should provide DNCs. Then you might want to be aware of that, right? And if you go and get a weird email later on that says that something's not right, or that you've done, or that you need to click something or download something, you might say, hey, I remember seeing this in that threat data and threat intelligence that I was looking at. Threat data and threat intelligence can come from two primary sources. One is going to be open source intelligence, and the other one's going to be proprietary or closed source intelligence. Both are relevant. One's usually more tailored to what you're looking for. It's the proprietary and closed source one. And one may be more useful or more specific than the other one. So we're going to talk through a few of these. Community intelligence is going to be when you see something's wrong, and you've probably done this before. Let's say you go to a local business and that local business is closed, and you jump on Facebook real quick and you search for that business's name, and you look to see if anybody's talking about that business in any of their posts or in any of the chat arounds, and somebody says, yeah, they all got COVID and that business got shut down for a week. It's open source and community intelligence, right? That person may not be a great resource. Their intent is not to provide intelligence about that topic full time. They're not a professional by any means, but they're relating what they saw, what they heard, what they know, and they're providing that in an open format where you can find it, right? A good example of this is Twitter. I use Twitter for open source intelligence on the daily, and I publish open source intelligence on my Twitter on the daily. Most recently, yesterday, Microsoft had a false alert for a piece of software called Rabadon, and they were alerting on a bunch of different platforms saying, hey, Rabadon's malicious, and Rabadon is this software and it's in your environment. And so I went on Twitter and I started looking, and I found other people talking about Rabadon and saying, I'm dealing with this Rabadon outbreak at my workplace. It just started 15 minutes ago, which matched my data. And I was able to publish my stuff and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is the type of files that I'm seeing it on. This is the results of what happens when I scan that. All those kind of things were open source intelligence that I was providing to the community. There's others available out there, though. Again, the book has several of them. I believe on page 97, will be under the open source intelligence header.
Vault's another really good source, too, for free open source intelligence.
Yeah, for sure. I've put Alien Vault into the public category, so I'll have to check it maybe in the book. I think they put Alien Vault in there too, but I'll double check, because that's absolutely one that people should know. If you guys are taking notes, Alien Vault is one that you want to know. Government is also another place to get intelligence. Lots of governments, including the U.S. government, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and through the Department of Defense Cyber Crime Center, dc3.mil, will publish intelligence. So they'll publish information about who's attacking what, how they attacked it, when they attacked it, what they attacked it with, and any other information that's available. Now, why might we want to know what people are attacking with, and how they're attacking, and who they're attacking? I'll give you guys a second to get off mute if anybody wants to volunteer an answer. Let me phrase the question this way to anybody who wants to answer. If I knew that the Taliban was attacking people with shoe bombs or whatever, right? We'll say shoe bombs in this case. Then what might I want to do at the airport to prevent shoe bombers?
Check their shoes.
Check their shoes. That's a great one, right? Check their shoes. Make them wear sandals. You might want to check their shoes. Why? Because you know that the bad guys are doing a specific type of activity, right? And so just like we might check their shoes if they're shoe bombing, then we might need to collect this information so that we can change the way that we're defending ourselves and change the way we're defending from certain types of attacks. The book, you really need to read this part of the book. You should read the whole book, but in the lecture, I'm trying to distill it and give you like the most important parts of the objectives so that you can understand it easily. The book does a really good job of talking about this and talking about using strategic intelligence to understand where you need to spend time and resources. Just like the bad guys only have so much resource and so much funding, you only have so much funding, right? You only have so many bodies that can work on something, that can build something, that can defend something. You only have so many hours in the day. You only have so much money to pay those employees, etc. If the Taliban's attacking is sending shoe bombers to attack Western countries, and I'm in Antarctica, I'm probably not in danger of being attacked by shoe bombers, right? Well, that may not be relevant to me. I probably don't want to spend all my time hiring people to check people's shoes at the airport in Antarctica. The government and other organizations who publish threat intelligence are going to give us all that information about who attacked who, and how, and using what techniques, and then that's what we're going to use to make our decisions and how we protect ourselves. So besides the government, there's vendor sites. There's a lot of different vendor sites like Microsoft, Cisco, Mandiant. All of them are places where you can go and find out information from businesses who said, hey, we see so-and-so attacking so-and-so, and this is how they did it. And they provide write-ups. Those are often called white papers of intelligence that you can go and look at, or threat feeds that you can subscribe to. And then there's public sources. Public sources are going to be like Virus Share, the SANS Internet Storm Center. They're not affiliated with a specific vendor, and they're not affiliated with a specific government, and they're not just random people. Public is usually people who do cybersecurity, are involved in industry trade groups like Crow's Nest Information Security or something like that, and they publish information as an organization and say, hey, we have a high level of confidence and expertise, and we assert this to be true. Any questions about those differences in the difference in what we're seeing in a community feed versus a government feed versus vendor and public? Okay, we'll keep going. Next one's going to be proprietary and closed source intelligence. Any large enough organization, government, or enterprise is likely going to pay for a closed source or proprietary intelligence feed. I know that companies that I've worked for currently and companies I've worked for before that were large enough all paid for this. They said, we want to know who the bad guys are specifically that are attacking people like us. We want to know if they steal some of our data. We want to know if they breach our networks, etc. And so what these proprietary and closed source groups will often do is they'll embed agents, they'll embed insiders within these criminal groups, within their chat rooms. They'll exploit their servers and all that kind of stuff, and watch the conversations that they're having, watch who they're targeting, watch how they're discussing, how they're going to break into things. It's fascinating, some of the data that we get out of some of these closed source intelligence feeds, because they'll literally write us up a report and they'll say, hey, on the 12th, actor A and actor B were talking in a chat room on this dark website. They were talking about your company specifically. They said that they had found an email server that was in this country at this IP, and that they were going to break into it, and they were trying to break into it with this, but they weren't successful, so they used this. Or they might say it wasn't you, but it was one of your vendors, or it wasn't you, but it was one of your competitors, right? So you should know that threat actors are targeting this. Closed source data is usually going to be extremely high quality, generally, and extremely sensitive. I would not want people to know that that server that the bad guys found was out on the internet and was susceptible to whatever the bad guys had found, right? So I wouldn't want somebody to just go onto Twitter and say, hey, Justin's server's out there on the internet. You can go and talk to it. And I'm trying to break into it. So closed source feeds are usually going to be paid. They're usually going to be very high quality and specific. Any questions about those closed ones? Cool. Just 2 vocabulary words that you guys need to know. When you're dealing with intelligence, you'll see both of these. One is an indicator of compromise. So an indicator of compromise can be just about anything, but it's most often going to be like a file signature, a hash, an IP address, a log entry, anything that shows that a compromise has happened or that a breach has occurred. So when bad guys do things on your network, it's going to leave traces. If somebody uses my key card to enter my daughter's daycare, they say steal my key card, and they use it to enter the daycare, I'm going to see that key card in the logs, right? Even if I wasn't there or not. It's the same way if somebody breaks into your network from a certain IP address or using somebody's credentials, then you may be able to say, hey, we saw that every time we got broke into by this person, they were coming from this location, right? They came from this IP address. So that IP address becomes an indicator of compromise, just like my missing or stolen card may become an indicator of compromise, right? If they see it in the logs, they know that somebody entered the building that wasn't supposed to using that stolen card. And then
channels are big indicators of compromise. If you see anything internally that's talking to something externally that's not typical.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't got to C2 yet, but yeah, you're spot on, Nick. There are times when you'll see data going from inside of your business to outside of your business that shouldn't be going that direction. And that's often shared between individuals because bad guys will use the same equipment over and over again, the same infrastructure over and over again. And so sometimes I'll be able to say, hey, I saw this going from my network to point A, and then Nick can say, oh, I also saw one of our servers talking to point A. I need to go and look at that because that's an indicator of compromise. Because Justin published it and said it was, or Microsoft did, or CISA did, or the NSA, or whoever. The next other thing is tactics, techniques, and procedures. These are a little more difficult to pin down, but these let you know exactly who an APT is, an advanced persistent threat. Lots of times you can look at something, and just like there's maker's marks and tool marks in normal smithing or normal workmanship, you can look at pieces of code, you can look at the way people do things, and you can say, hey, this looks just like the way that so-and-so did this previously. Or I remember Microsoft writing up a report and saying that they saw this behavior occurring. I can go and check for these other techniques. I can go and see if they did these other procedures, if they did these other tactics. And if so, then now I know I can pretty much attribute it to that APT, and I can tell other people. I can look for more IOCs to publish, or I can look for similar IOCs that were related to those CTPs. Do we have any questions about those 2 vocabulary terms? You'll hear me say IOCs 1,000 more times in this course, and you'll hear me say TTPs 1,000 more times as well. All right, cool. All right, assessing threat intel. We need to know, is it timely? Is it accurate? And is it relevant? There will be things all the time that'll pop up and be wrong, just completely wrong, because they're old. I can't tell you how many times on a day-to-day basis I see this where I'll go and check a piece of intelligence and I'll get an alert and it'll be like, your computer's talking to this thing and it's bad. And I'm like, how do you know it's bad? Show me. I'll go and look in the software and say, software, show me the thing by which you determined that this was bad. And be like, 7 years ago, there was a virus that came from this website and infected 2 computers. I'm like, okay, well, not timely. It's way old. 7 years in internet time might as well be a millennia, right? A malicious host or a malicious server's not going to stay out there on the internet for that long, continuing to be malicious in most instances, unless somebody's actively trying to be malicious, like an advanced persistent threat. Is it accurate, right? Where did you get this information from? How do I know it's accurate? How often are you reliable? Can I confirm it with other sources, or is this one person one time saying that it's this way, right? So is the threat information that I'm getting accurate? Are other people confirming it? And then is it relevant? Like we talked about with the shoe bombers bombing the Western countries. If I'm in Antarctica and I'm not a Western country, then it's unlikely that the shoe bombers are going to come after me. So I probably don't need to be worried about what kind of shoe they wore or what flights they took or what airports they left from or whatever, because I'm not going to be dealing with any of those things. So I can usually take that data and write it off. On the other hand, being a global food and beverage supplier that I work for currently, if somebody's attacking another food and beverage supplier, that's probably a lot more relevant to me, right? And I want to pay more attention to that. Any questions there? Seems straightforward, right? You should use this in life. Anytime somebody tells you something, we used to say in the military that if somebody told you something that was information, if 3 reliable sources told you something, it was intelligence, right? So that's not a hard and fast rule, but it's just a quick way to look at something and be like, do I need to pay attention to this or not? How much time do I need to waste on this, right? All right, this is something extra that I stuck in for your all's benefit. I'm going to show it to you really quickly, and then I'll give you guys the slides, and you can look at it because it's not in your books, or you can go to Wikipedia and look at it. There's something called Admiralty codes. I can never pronounce it right. Not Admiralty, but Admiralty codes. It was a quick way to confidence score threat intelligence. Was originally created and adopted by NATO for threat intelligence scoring, and it works off 2 factors. How reliable is the source and how credible is the source? A1 is going to be the highest and F6 is the lowest. This is a common way to publish threat intelligence, and it's an accepted way to publish threat intelligence, but the book doesn't teach it. So you're not going to see Admiralty on your test, but I do want you guys to know it exists. I use it when I publish documents. I use it when I discuss people who are providing us intelligence, and it's a generally accepted way to go about this. If you look here, I pulled down this. Again, I'll send you these slides so you don't have to write it down. But really quickly, Admiralty Code looks at the reliability of the source. So they're completely reliable. I have no doubt of the authenticity, the trustworthiness or competency, and the source has a history of complete reliability versus the reliability can't be judged. There's no basis exists for evaluating the reliability of the source, or even worse, in my opinion, is E, lacking in authenticity, trustworthiness, and competency, history of invalid information. So if you watch Fox News or CNN, either one, their reliability is usually around a D or an E, right? They have a history of invalid information. They're not very trustworthy. As opposed to maybe on-the-ground reporting or a first-party source or a third-party uninterested source or something like that, right? Then you look at their credibility. Credibility of the information is taken apart from the person who provided you. So the first part you're assessing is who provided me the information and how likely are they to be telling the truth and to be correct. And then you're looking at the credibility. Can I confirm this with other information that I have on the subject? Can I confirm it with other sources? Does it fit what we already know to be true? Or is there no basis existing for evaluating the validity of the information? Or is it not logical in itself, or it's contradicted by other information that I do know to be true? So again, Admiralty scores A through F for reliability, 1 through 6. A1 is the highest, F6 is the lowest. Questions about Admiralty codes? Admiralty codes? I can't say that word. Okay, cool. What about threat indicator management and exchange? There's 2 standard languages used to share threat information with each other. One is STIX and one is OpenIOC. So if I want to send you this data about the bad guys I saw and what they were doing and how they were doing it, it helps to have a common language that we can all speak and that we can all explain stuff in. There's 2 of these that exist. STIX is the one that you need to know. OpenIOC is another one that exists. It's created by a vendor called Mandiant. It's not bad, it's just not as highly adopted. STIX is managed by an open information standard now, and it's adopted by just about everybody. It stands for Structured Threat Information Expression. I'm going to show you an example of it here. Structured data usually means that there's categories, which you can see on the left side, like type, created, modified, labels, name, description, aliases. There's types that are defined, and then there's allowable options to go into the other fields. So like for the option of type, threat actor is one of the types that can go in that field. But because the data is structured, you couldn't just write poop in there and then put that into the threat feed, right? Or put it into data information or data intelligence. Most automated systems wouldn't take it because it didn't match the structured data rules that we're dealing with. Or if it did take it, it would error out and nobody would know what to do with it because it's not the type that it's supposed to be, and then nobody would use it. You can see another one in labels. They label it as crime syndicate, but that option, there's other options that can go in that field, and if you use something that wasn't supposed to be in that field, then it wouldn't be accepted. Then you have other parts of structured data that can be open-ended. So you'll have all your labels on the left, or all your columns on the left, and then you have those fields, and again, some of them can be predefined, and some of them are free form. So like the use of a name, obviously the name, you don't have to pick from a specific defined name. You'll be able to put in whatever the name is that you're dealing with. But in resource level and sophistication down near the bottom are actually defined, and they have things that you have to choose from. So if you've never worked with structured data, this is what structured data most often looks like. This is how it's understood and how it's used. Please ask questions about this. If there's anything here, let's talk about it real quick. Chat or voice. No shame here. If you've not worked with structured data before, this may be new to you. Okay, cool.
I mean, this is like completely. It's like reading French right now, and it's interesting. I understand that, but I thought I would share my confusion currently. And I'm wondering, is this going to get better the more I deal with it, or will it continue to be like this?
Structured data or the topic of information security?
Sorry,
The
Justin.
type threat actor. So, how do you is what's currently on the screen? Is this what you would put into a certain system that is somewhat like a database, and it's almost like a Google search? You're adding a answer to a certain search.
Yeah, kind of. Okay, yeah, I see where you're going. And sorry, let me be more clear. Sticks is a way to share the information that I see to other people in a way that they can easily consume it. So if I want to tell you about a bad guy that I saw on my network, or I want to tell you about some malicious activity that occurred on my network, then this is how I'm going to do it, right? Imagine that there's a form that everybody shares, and it's the bad guy did this form, or the bad guy did this report. This is how you file a bad guy did this report. On the bad guy did this report, there's a type, and there's a couple of tick boxes that I have to choose from. And in this case, one of those types is threat actor. So when I go to fill out the form, I'm going to say, what type was it? Oh, he was a threat actor, right? When did it happen? That'd be the created, right? That's the date I'm filling out the form. Did I modify it? Did I need to update the form? Well, that's the date I modified it. What was the name of the bad guy? The name of the bad guy was Joseph Adams, right? Or whatever. Description. What did Joseph do? Tried to break into my hotel room, right, using the example that's on the board. Then I'm going to take and stick that in that database, and I'm going to publish that out for the world, right, assuming I'm doing it as open threat intelligence or open threat information. I'm going to put it out there, and everybody in the world can look and see, sticking with Joseph, right? They can say, go on the database, and they can search, we had a bad guy in our network, and he signed all of the bad emails, haha, signed Joseph. And they go and they search Joseph, and they pull this up, and they say, hey, Justin published a data intelligence report showing that he also saw Joseph in his network, and this is what Joseph did. And based on his knowledge, Joseph used local USB threats, he was an intermediate sophistication, and he believes he works for the government. And we know Justin's usually pretty right about these when he fills them out, so we're going to give him an A1. He's pretty reliable, he's pretty credible. We're able to match these up to other sources. Does that make better sense about how the data is used, or about what we're looking at here?
A lot. Could it be public, or is it more of a localized network, like a certain text messaging group? Like the way,
like within a closed organization.
Yeah, within a closed organization.
Is it?
Or is it? Yeah, I don't think it's open to
You cut out a lot, but I'm
Should
gonna
have access.
you cut out a lot, but I'm gonna back up 2 slides. I'm gonna repeat what you said or what I think you said, and then correct me if I'm wrong. You asked what's the distribution of this document, right? Does this document go within an organization that I work for, or is it public out to the world? Is that correct?
Yes, that works. That's very well.
Okay, perfect. So going back to here, you get to choose, right? So the company that you work for may say that you can publish STIX reports to anybody, right? That it's just put it out on the internet, doesn't matter, you can publish it to anybody. Governments usually work this way. A lot of the government ones are pretty just open, right? The reason, and vendor ones are pretty open. The proprietary and closed source ones are going to be, like you said, something that will stay inside the company or stay inside of an organization. The community ones often will not meet this because the community ones are just going to be like Joe Bob just saying on his blog, like, I saw these bad guys, and this is what happened. So they're not going to be adopting this. Community is going to be kind of like layperson. As a cybersecurity professional, if you wanted to share information with other people, you're going to put it in this format for 2 reasons. One, it's expected. This is what people expect to receive from you. And the way that everybody has agreed to share information is via this form. And 2, something we'll talk about in a moment, is there are things called threat feeds. And you put this information into your threat feeds, and those threat feeds get compiled, and then companies will take action based off that information. So you could put in like a malicious email address, just throwing out an example here, and I could set it up and say, if I get any STIX information that has an email address in it, I automatically want to block that email address. I don't want to have to look at it. I don't want a human to have to assess it. I don't want to read the report. If we get one of these and the type is threat actor and it has an email address in it, I want my software to start blocking that email address. I don't want any of my users to get that email. That's a really common way to handle threat data because it's difficult to sit and read through it. You could have data coming from a million different places, and it's a way to put it into a form, in a format, where people can automatically or automagically take action against the data that's being provided to them. Does that track?
Very well. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you for the question. Thanks for speaking up and for asking. So, yeah, this is structured data. You'll run into structured data in all kinds of different areas, and structured data usually has a definition somewhere, and you can go and look at that structured data and find out what the different options are. If you look in your book will discuss STIX specifically, and it'll tell you where you can go and see the standard for what fields are available in STIX and then what options are available in those fields. So it'll either tell you the field's free form, like the name field, free form just meaning you can type anything you want, or it's a defined field and you need to choose an option from it, like resource level being government, something like that. So the way that we share those, so now that we know why we define them that way, the way we define those and share those is using something called TAXII. TAXII is the trusted automated exchange of indicator information protocol. You don't have to know anything else about it other than that. It's how we share STIX data with each other. If a program that you want to buy for your company is TAXII compatible, that means that that program can receive STIX data and then take actions based off that information, and or publish STIX data. So as it sees bad things happening, it may put out its own STIX responses that other products can then receive and then take action off of. So what that might look like is in your email, you report an email as bad, and the email server works with TAXII, and so the email server puts out a STIX message to anybody who's listening and says, hey, guys, I got this malicious email. Things that talk using TAXII receive that STIX data, and then they take that STIX data and say, oh, I'm going to block email addresses that include this because I want to block this because that's how I'm configured to do it or whatever. But TAXII is a way for systems to talk and share STIX data and take action on it. Any questions about TAXII? It can get a lot more complicated than that, but that's the overall way that it works. Okay, cool. And then the final one is OpenIOC. OpenIOC is not transferred using TAXII. OpenIOC is an alternative standard to STIX. Again, you can go and look at the standard, but it's another way to do sticks data, but under OpenIOC. And it was released by the vendor Mandiant. It works with all the Mandiant stuff, all the Mandiant equipment. Mandiant makes their stuff so that it all talks using OpenIOC, all the different softwares they make, but it's not as well adopted. So you do have to know it for the test. In my career as a cybersecurity professional, and then in my career as a computer professional in general, I had never heard of OpenIOC until I was going through this textbook and saw this here. I don't know of any software that I've run into that's highly adopted that uses this outside of the Mandiant ecosystem, but it's included in the textbook. Questions? Comments or concerns? Criticisms? Vague ramblings?
So if you were doing a sticks report, would you just go to Google and go to sticks and then go to one of the links there?
Yeah, let's see how we can do a sticks report real quick. I would probably look up sticks STIX template. And sometimes with acronyms, computer acronyms, you have to put in something like InfoSec or something else. You can also put in like sticks standard template. It's not getting me where I want to go, so I guess I'm going to have to get you guys a copy of it. Oasis is who manages sticks now. OASIS. They have a really good website on GitHub called Introduction to Sticks, and I can send that link to you guys. It has a what is sticks and why should I care, and then gives you an introductory walkthrough and allows you to know more about it, right? And it breaks down all the different fields, and then within the fields breaks down all the different options that are available within that field. So we can look through that. I can't switch the screen to it, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Or I would show it to the class at large, but I can put that link in chat shortly. We can take a look at it there. Does that answer your question? I don't have a good example prepared. Most of the time, stick stuff will publish using Taxi, and so a lot of the times I don't have to deal with sticks things. I don't have to like manually fill out a sticks report. That was just as an example with the bad guy report thing. Most of the time, the sticks data is going to be produced by my tools, and I may have to modify it. Or if somebody's sending me like a white paper, which a white paper is just like a published research paper essentially on a topic or a memo on a topic. Sometimes sticks data will be published in an appendix so that if I didn't have a way to automatically receive it, that I can put it into a system. So tools that you work with may have an option to put in indicators of compromise, which we talked about earlier. And so I can get those indicators of compromise from the sticks data and then put it into the tool or the software. Does that make sense?
It does. I think
Okay.
today's the first day that I have gotten past the rudimentary concept of Google being all surface web and there being like a dark theme of Google that you use to access the deep web or something. Like, yeah, like it's encapsulated instead of just using hashes or like you said earlier.
Right, yeah. So we'll actually go on the deep web, you'll go on the deep web throughout your day, right? Just accessing different things. If you have a corporate site at work that's only accessible on your work computer, like that's deep technically. But we'll go on the dark web in this class before the class is over. I'll show you guys how to get to the dark web, and we'll go on there and go to some sites that aren't malicious. They're just places where people are looking for anonymity or pseudo-anonymity. So we'll break more into these topics as we go. I hope this isn't too like sink or swim. The content's there. The content's there in the book, and we're always here to help everybody. So if there's anything that I kind of gloss over or I think is just in my head, I'm used to it and I don't go in depth enough, just throw your hand up and say like, hey guys, we need to talk about this more. And we'll just talk about it more. Yeah, ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, these are specifically created to share information. You're going to have these in your books again. I didn't get a lot on this one. Let me see how much the book touches on it. Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. They just have those few paragraphs. So ISACs were introduced by the president in 1998, I think, under Clinton. And basically, an ISAC may be public, may be private. If it's public, you can just go and look at it. Any lay person can. If it's private, it's usually specific to an industry and members of that industry. So I'm members of several different ISACs, several public ones. You can just go and sign up for them. There's examples of them in the book. CISA is a very popular one. CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They're a government agency that's tasked with the cybersecurity and safety of the United States, whether it be public or private, or government infrastructure. Private ISACs will be related around a specific industry. So I might be part of an ISAC. I was part of an ISAC previously that focused on healthcare providers. Right, I worked for one of the big insurance providers, and we joined an ISAC. I had to prove that I worked for one of those healthcare providers, and on the daily and throughout the day, I would get reports from other insurance providers and other hospital systems saying we were attacked in this manner, or this is what happened, and here's specific information about what was attacked and how. That information is usually rated for distribution or not for distribution, right? So it may have very, very specific information about the attack and what happened, information that the general public should not be privy to, or we would not want them privy to. Or in the case of public information, it may just be flat out public information. It's like, hey, so-and-so got broken into, and here's how. This can happen in any industry. ISACs are most often used in cybersecurity and information security around healthcare and food and beverage industries and defense industries, but it could be anything. If you had a bunch of a bunch of masonry workers can put together an ISAC and say, we're going to share all the information about any masonry website that gets attacked or any masonry group that has cybersecurity concerns or whatever like that. So this is the last topic for tonight, but that's the basic concept of an ISAC. Are there any questions there? They broke these out. These are kind of like a threat intelligence feed, like one of the proprietary and closed source intelligence feeds, but they're usually specific to an industry, where a closed source feed, you may not define it to an industry. Closed source feed, you may just pay for highly specific information of what's occurring on the deep web or the dark web. So, anything there? I'm going to go ahead and cut my recording, and if you guys want to just go to like open conversation, then we'll conversate for a few minutes, see if there's any open questions about the topics covered tonight, and then we'll close out for the evening. Just a second to